All right, let's get right into it. We often think of building a nation as this thing that happens once, a project with a clear start and a clear end. But what if it's not like that at all? What if it's more like a living thing, something that's always growing, always facing new tests? Today, we're going to explore how India has navigated one of its biggest, most persistent challenges, that constant push and pull between national unity and powerful regional identities.
So let me just throw this question out there right at the start. Is the work of building a nation ever really done? I think the Indian experience tells us that, well, probably not. Just when you think you've figured out one set of problems, a whole new wave of challenges comes along, testing the very foundations of the country.
So right after 1947, India was dealing with these massive immediate crises. Things like partition and trying to get all the princely states on board. But by the time the 1980s rolled around, a totally different kind of test started to take center stage. As India's democracy grew, people in different regions began to say, hey, what about us? They started demanding more autonomy, a stronger voice for their own unique cultures and their own specific needs. And this became one of the central dramas of Indian politics.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter, the core conflict we're going to unpack today, this really delicate and often pretty difficult balancing act between the idea of a single unified Indian nation and the reality of its many, many distinct regions.
Okay, so the key term we need to get our heads around here is regional aspirations. Now, this isn't just about lines on a map. It's about communities feeling a shared identity. Maybe it's based on language, culture, or even the economy, and then demanding that their specific needs and dreams be recognized within the country's political system.
And here is where you can really see the tension. On one side, you've got the goal of national unity, which, of course, is absolutely crucial for any country to hold together. But on the other side, you have this vibrant, undeniable reality of regional diversity. The real challenge is making sure that the drive for unity doesn't end up silencing the very legitimate voices of all those different regions.
And this right here is what makes India's path so unique. Unlike a lot of European nations that kind of saw cultural diversity as a threat to be managed, India's leaders chose a different way, a democratic way. The whole philosophy was that letting regional aspirations have a political voice wasn't anti-national. Actually, it was seen as a vital, healthy part of a thriving, diverse democracy.
But what happens when that balance just completely breaks down? Well, the 1980s gave us some pretty stark and often tragic answers. This decade was really defined by major conflicts that just erupted when regional demands crashed up against state resistance.
Let's just take the case of Punjab. A major regional party, the Akali Dal, started out demanding greater political autonomy. But over time, the movement began to shift from more moderate voices to extremist elements. And what began as a political demand tragically spiraled into a violent, armed insurgency.
This timeline just shows how quickly and tragically things escalated. It all started with political demands back in '73. But by 1984, militants had taken refuge in the Golden Temple, the holiest shrine in Sikhism. This led to a hugely controversial and violent army operation to clear it out, known as Operation Blue Star. This action deeply, deeply hurt Sikh sentiments worldwide and led directly to the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi later that year. This devastating cycle of violence was only formally addressed with the Punjab Accord in 1985, which was a crucial first step back towards peace.
The aftermath of the assassination was just horrific. Terrible violence broke out against the Sikh community, especially in Delhi. This quote from the Justice Nanavati Commission report is chilling because it highlights the organized nature of the attacks, pointing to a massive failure of the state to protect its own citizens, and leaving a scar that has lasted for decades. Now, at the very same time, India's northeast was a whole different landscape of multiple, really complex movements. This wasn't just one single issue. It was a mix of different struggles, everything from demands for complete independence to fierce opposition against migrants coming into the region.
So if you break it down, politics in the Northeast were really driven by three main things. First, you had demands for more autonomy within the existing states. Second, you had powerful secessionist movements like the Mizo insurgency, which lasted for 2 whole decades. And third, you had these intense movements against people who were seen as outsiders, most famously the Assam movement, which was all about perceived illegal migration.
So, faced with all this violence and these really complex challenges, the Indian state eventually had to pivot its strategy. It started to move away from a purely suppressive law and order approach and towards a path of negotiation and accommodation. And the crucial lesson they learned was all in the strategy. Instead of just trying to crush dissent with force, the government's approach shifted.
It started opening up dialogues with movement leaders, aiming for negotiated settlements. And this is key. It often meant sharing real political power with the very same groups that had been leading the protests.
And you know what? This new strategy got real results. In 1985, you had accords in both Punjab and Assam that aimed to solve the core issues driving the conflicts. Then, a year later, the Mizo Accord was a huge turning point. It ended a 20-year insurgency, and Mizoram was transformed into one of the most peaceful states in the entire region. It really proved that dialogue could achieve what suppression never could.
But reconciliation, that's a long, long road. It's not just about signing documents. It's also about acknowledging the wrongs of the past. 20 years after the anti-Sikh violence, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's apology in Parliament was an incredibly powerful moment of national reflection, and it was a really crucial step in a very long healing process.
So after walking through these really tumultuous decades, what can we actually take away from all this? Well, these experiences offer some really profound lessons for any diverse democracy that's trying to build and maintain unity.
So the lessons are pretty clear, right? First, regional demands are a normal, even healthy part of democracy. Second, as all those accords showed, talking it out works way better than using force. Third, you have to share real political power. It's absolutely vital for making people feel included. Fourth, you can't ignore economic inequality between regions, because that's often the fuel for resentment. And finally, having a flexible constitution that can actually adapt to different regional needs is an incredible strength for a country as diverse as India.
If there is one single idea to take away from all of this, let it be this. India's unity has survived, and you could even argue it's gotten stronger, not by trying to erase its incredible diversity, but by finding democratic ways to accommodate it. Nation building, it turns out, is a process of constant negotiation.
And that brings us right back to our opening question, but maybe with a bit of a new perspective. The project of nation building is never really finished, because new dreams and new aspirations will always come up. The challenge, for India and for any diverse nation really, is to keep applying the hard-won lessons of the past to build a more inclusive future. So how do you keep up that delicate balancing act? Well, that remains the essential ongoing question.